Welcome to Relic of Stories, a place where time folds into shadow and forgotten legends breathe once more. Here, we wander through ancient ruins, whisper through lost scrolls, and trace the footsteps of warriors, kings, and ghosts. Every story is a doorway, every voice a remnant of something the world tried to forget. So dim the lights. Settle in and let the past speak to you, one haunting tale at a time. So let's start with Chapter 1, The Phantom General of Teutoburg Forest *. They say the sky was heavy with fog the night before it happened, the kind of damp, low-hanging mist that hugs the earth like a ghost refusing to let go, wrapping itself around every tree, every helmet, every thought. And in that murk where the stars could no longer be seen and even the moon seemed afraid to rise, 3 entire Roman legions stood quietly, waiting for dawn in the alien forest of Germania. Lead by Publius Quinctilius Varus, a man of senatorial nobility and political confidence, but little experience in war. Those legions were told they were marching into peace, that the people they had recently conquered would bend quietly to the will of Rome, and that their presence was merely symbolic, a reminder that the empire, distant as it was, still had reach. But the forest had other plans. There are stories, unofficial ones, buried between lines of surviving scrolls and whispered through the lips of frightened historians that Varus had been warned not to trust the man beside him. Arminius, a Germanic officer trained in Roman ways, fluent in their tongue, knighted by their emperor, but never truly Roman, never truly loyal. Varus, perhaps drunk on power or blinded by civility, ignored the warning signs, the late arrivals, the broken supply lines, the tribes who had suddenly gone silent. And so he marched his men into the shadows of Teutoburg Forest, believing in order, in empire, and the indestructibility of Rome. But empires bleed, and the forest knows how to make giants kneel. The first ambush came when the rain started, sudden, and loud, soaking shields and loosening arrow strings, as if nature itself was on the side of the ambushers. And from the trees came screams, not of pain, but of war cries, wild and rising, unrelenting, as if every branch held a ghost with a spear. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter drawn over 3 endless days, a ghost story stretched into a massacre with no solid line, no center, no retreat, because the forest closed behind them like a curtain, and the Roman formations crumbled like paper in the mud. And Varus, whose name would be cursed in Senate halls for centuries, rode not toward safety, but into the heart of the storm, reportedly falling on his sword before the enemy could reach him. Though some say he disappeared before the blade touched his skin, some say his men found him praying to Mars, the god of war, begging for fire or thunder to break the enemy lines, his voice hoarse, his knees bloodied from the damp earth. But no god came. When it was over, when the rain stopped and the screams fell silent, the forest stood still again, indifferent and eternal, holding within it the bones of over 15,000 Roman soldiers, and the echo of a general's name that would be buried deeper than his sword. Years later, Germanicus, the nephew of Emperor Tiberius, would return to the site, not to reclaim the land, but to bury the dead, only to find bones strung like decorations on trees, skulls placed in mock altars, and rusted swords buried, like offerings to forgotten gods. And though he tried to gather what remained of those legions, there were no full bodies, no surviving standards, Not even a single Roman coin. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole, uniforms and all. Even now historians argue whether the exact route taken by Verus and his men will ever be known, for Teutoburg hides its paths, and the terrain once mapped in sand and chalk has been changed by centuries of moss and root. But the legend persists that Varus never died, that he walks still beneath the leaves, his armor half rusted, his eyes searching, his voice repeating the orders no one followed, commanding ghostly. Legions in an eternal drill that echoes between the trees during the longest nights of the year, and they say, if you walk too far into those woods, alone and in silence, you might hear marching. Not modern footsteps, not animals, but the rhythm of sandals on wet earth, disciplined and dreadful, fading into the fog, as if a phantom army is still trying to return to Rome, unaware that Rome has long forgotten them. The name Varus became a curse to emperors. Augustus, upon hearing the news, was said to have torn his garments and screamed to the heavens, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions," a cry so anguished it haunted the palace walls for weeks. But the legions never returned, and neither did their general. His body was never recovered, only silence. And in that silence, stories grew of a man who walked into a forest with flags, high and soldiers many, and who became, with time, little more than a shadow among trees. The forest of Teutoburg does not boast its victory. It simply waits and listens, because it knows one day someone else will come, thinking they understand. It's silence, thinking they can pass through without permission, and once again the trees will close, the fog will rise, and history will repeat itself, and Varus will be waiting, not as a man, but as the memory of what happens when power walks blind into the unknown. He is not just a figure lost to time. He is a question, a warning, a phantom general, still marching, still commanding legions that no longer exist in a forest that remembers everything, even the silence. Let's begin Chapter 2. The samurai who walked into the Ufo let us turn the page now, leaving behind the mist-drenched forests of Germania, and walk quietly into a different kind of silence. One not broken by the roar of Roman legions, but by the gentle hush of drifting sakura petals and the barely audible breath of a warrior who chose disappearance over death, honor over explanation, and silence over legacy. The story takes us to the end of Japan's Sengoku Judean age of war and upheaval, of shifting allegiances and burning castles, where blades decided destinies and the name of a warlord could rise or fall with a single stroke. And among this chaos there lived a man who was not born of any noble house, whose bloodline bore no crest, and whose armor bore no sigil, yet whose name was whispered with reverence and fear across the island's Kuro Ichiro, the Black. 1. The Wandering Sword. No records speak of his origin. Some say he was once the son of a potter who forged his first blade in secret, not in steel but in silence, watching the samurai from afar as they trained, mimicking their stances in the reflection of rice fields. Others believe he was once a retainer betrayed in battle, his entire clan wiped clean by politics and fire, his own survival a curse and a vow. What we do know is this: wherever war raged, Kuro Ichiro was already there, a ghost in armor, a blade unsheathed before the trumpet blew. He did not fight for gold or glory. He fought for balance. When one army grew too powerful, he appeared on the side of the weak. When cruelty took the throne, he cut it down. And yet he was never seen twice in the same place. Villagers described him as a man of average build, black robes tied tight, a single katana at his hip, and a mask, shaped like the blank face of a no-actor, with no expression, no identity. His blade, they say, bore no name, only a symbol etched so finely into the hilt that even seasoned smiths could not decipher it. Some said it was the character for void. Others said it was simply a crack, a flaw that he carried willingly. The most famous tale is not of a battle, but of a disappearance dot on the day of falling, leaves a date unmarked in calendars, but remembered in breathless tales. He arrived at the edge of a battlefield outside the Shizugatak Valley. Two rival daimyo had clashed violently for control of the trade routes. The land was soaked in blood, and the air hummed with the cries of dying men. And yet, through the fog, Kuro Ichiro stepped alone, silent, as if walking through rain that could not touch him. Witnesses claimed the battle froze, that even generals looked away from their war maps. The swordsmen on both sides hesitated, their weapons trembling. He walked to the center of the field, unsheathed his katana, and pointed it to the sky. Then he vanished, not in a burst of smoke, not in the way ninjas are said to disappear with tricks and ropes, but as if the fog swallowed him in a single breath, as if the world agreed he no longer needed to exist. No body was found. Sword. No footprints. Only silence. And the wind. That day, the battle did not continue. The soldiers on both sides dropped their weapons and returned to their camps. The warlords negotiated a ceasefire that night, though neither ever admitted fear. To this day, the valley of Shizugatak is avoided by travelers at dusk. Locals say the fog there moves like a river, and if you speak his name aloud, if you whisper Kuro Ichiro, you may find yourself walking in circles, your path repeating until the sun rises or until you forget why you entered at all. Some scholars believe he was a symbol, not a man, a representation of the guilt that haunted warriors who had lost their way. Others insist he was real, that the imperial archives once held his bounty under 3 different names, and that all 3 were redacted without explanation. There is even one scroll hidden in a private collection in Kyoto that claims a sword matching his description was buried in a shrine beside an unmarked grave. When unearthed, the blade was still sharp, but it shattered when exposed to sunlight. No one has explained why. Even now, in quiet villages and aging dojos, the name of Kuro Ichiro is spoken with more reverence than that of kings, not because he ruled, not because he won, but because he vanished, because he stepped into a fog none of us can follow, and perhaps, in doing so, he became more than a man. He became the very question every warrior must answer. When the war ends, when the banners fall, when your blade is still, what remains? Not victory. Not glory. Only silence. And perhaps a path that leads not forward, but inward, into the fog. Into memory, into legend. And that, dear listener, is where we leave him. Not dead. Forgotten, but walking still in a place where stories become shadows, and shadows become truth. Let's begin Chapter 3. The Elephants That Never Aratiua Need to Let Us begin Chapter 3, a chapter carved in snow, stone, and silence. Our journey shifts westward to a time when elephants crossed mountains, led not by kings, but by vengeance and vision. Among all the military campaigns in history, few rival the daring of Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who marched his army, including war elephants, over the Alps during the Second Punic War to strike at the heart of Rome. It was an act of pure defiance and impossible strategy made real through sheer force of will. But among his many tales, one remains buried beneath centuries of snow and superstition. The battalion that vanished. It was winter in the high passes of northern Italy, a time when the sun barely rose, and the mist lingered like a breath that refused to fade. Hannibal's army had survived starvation, ambush, frostbite, and betrayal, but just beyond the Val di Susa, he ordered a strategic maneuver. A full battalion, around 400 soldiers and 12 war elephants, was sent into the fog to flank a Roman scouting party. They never returned. At first, their absence caused no alarm. Delays were common in mountain warfare. Paths would collapse. Ice would split. Sound carried poorly, and time was measured in how long one could stay warm. But hours passed. Then a day, then 3. Scouts found nothing. No prints, no scattered weapons, no torn banners, just a strange, smooth depression in the snow, almost like a circle pressed by something massive. Now gone. Hannibal's captain suggested desertion. Locals whispered of the Bianca Nebbia, the white mist that rose once every few decades, swallowing those it touched. The elders of the nearby mountain tribes spoke of spirits angered by foreign beasts, Spiriti del Monte, guardians of the Highlands, who tolerated bloodshed, but not the presence of elephants, which they called the walking stones of Carthage. Roman spies who later heard of the event dismissed it as Carthaginian myth-making. But inscriptions have since been found scratched into cliff faces near Lake Maggiore, in a dialect older than Latin, warning of the gray eyes in the snow and the call that comes without echo. Modern historians tried to rationalize the event. Avalanche, perhaps. A crevasse hidden beneath snowfall. Maybe even betrayal by mercenaries from the Celtic tribes. But none of these explain the missing beasts. Elephants leave trails always, and carcasses. Yet nothing was found. No bones. No tusks. No crushed gear. The animals and their human commanders were simply gone, as though they had stepped through the fabric of the world. In the centuries that followed, villagers in the alpine valleys would occasionally report sightings. Giant shapes moving through thick snow, silent despite their bulk, tremors in the earth with no cause. And once every generation, a trader or shepherd would go missing last seen near a place where the mist pools unnaturally, even in dry seasons. 1. Account from 1843 speaks of a French mountaineer who claimed to have followed a strange trail of enormous prints into a glacier cave. Inside, he said he found carvings unfamiliar animals etched into the walls and shields with symbols not known. To local historians, when he returned a year later with others, the cave had collapsed, buried, erased. Another rumor comes from World War. Italian soldiers stationed high in the Alps during trench warfare reported ghostly trumpet sounds, long, low blasts, not unlike an elephant's call echoing through the canyons at night. The reports were dismissed as nerves, frostbite-induced hallucinations, but the logs still exist, scribbled in shivering handwriting. Perhaps the most chilling theory comes from a fringe historian who spent 3 decades researching what he called temporal convergence points, places in the world where time folds. According to his notes, the Alpine stretch where Hannibal's battalion vanished aligns with ancient Druidic sites, Roman necropolises, and fault lines that have produced magnetic anomalies. He believed the elephants and soldiers weren't buried or killed. He believed they were displaced, moved, somewhere else. A world not our own. A hidden layer within the Earth's crust, or a different time entirely where the elephants still march, watched by spirits not yet named by science. Skeptics laugh, of course, and rightly so. Yet one cannot help but wonder why Hannibal, a man of ruthless logic and iron discipline, refused to ever speak of the incident again. He who wrote records, he who kept journals, he who recounted every triumph and every loss remained. Silent. Not a word, as if speaking it would invite it back. As if the white mist could hear. And so we remember them now, not for the war they fought, but for the mystery they became. 400 men, 12 were elephants, lost in the mists of northern Italy, not fallen in battle, not frozen to death, but vanished. Into silence, into legend. Into the snow that still holds their names. And every so often, when fog rolls in faster than it should, the mountain watches and waits. Let's begin Chapter 4. The Mongol archer who defied Now. Let us ride eastward into the dusty winds and boundless skies of the Eurasian steppe, an empire born in thunder, led by horsemen who rode like spirits, struck like lightning, and vanished before dust settled on the battlefield. We enter the age of the Mongol Empire, when Genghis Khan's warriors shook the world, not with armies alone, but with terror that outran the sound of hooves. And among them there was one whose name was never written, but whose arrows flew straighter than stories. They called him Subbutai's shadow. He was not kin to Subutai the Valiant, the great strategist who conquered half of Europe for Genghis. No, this figure was something stranger. Some said he was born on the night of a blood eclipse. Others believed he was not born at all, but summoned, pulled from the cold steppe wind to balance death itself. He was known only through whispers, because he never spoke, his presence announced only by the silence of birds and the frost on grass even in spring. He wore a mask of blackened bronze, with slits too narrow to see his eyes. His horse, dark as midnight and larger than the rest, never made a sound. And his arrows were not marked by feathers, but strips of cloth bearing ancient symbols, unreadable even to the shamans of the court. It is said he never missed, not once, not at 60 paces, not at a gallop, not in darkness, not in blizzards that blinded even the gods. He was not assigned. He appeared at Samarkand. When a rebel prince escaped capture, the shadow rode from the edge of camp, loosed one arrow, and vanished again. The prince was found lifeless, no wound, only a small line of frost across his chest at the Battle of Kalka River. He rode alone into the center of the Rus army's flank, drawing every archer's eye, drawing fire for 10 seconds that saved 100 warriors. He was hit 13 times, witnesses said. Arrows pierced his armor, yet he did not fall. He simply disappeared into the dust. His body was never recovered, that the Mongols whispered that he was a journey car, a heart spirit, a soul bound by oath, who could not pass on until his purpose was fulfilled. What that purpose was, no one knew. Only that wherever sacred burial grounds were disturbed, wherever Genghis Khan's memory was mocked or Mongol graves desecrated, he would reappear. There is an ancient tale recorded by Persian scribes of a city that rose overnight near the Caspian Sea, a trading hub that refused tribute to the Khan. That night, its watchtowers were struck down by single arrows from the dark. Not fire, not siege, just arrows, one by one. The city gates were found, open in the morning, every guard asleep, yet breathing. And painted on the stone was the symbol of the Mongol, thunderbolt dipped in blood that never dried. He became an omen dot if horses grew restless. If shadows gathered in strange patterns on the steppe, the generals would pause. They would listen, and sometimes in the wind they would hear it. The hiss of an arrow in the distance, loosed not at flesh, but at fate. Some say he was a loyal spirit of Genghis himself, that when the great Khan was buried in secret, his resting place unknown, to this day a vow was made. One warrior would guard his tomb from afar, ensuring no emperor, no scholar, no thief would ever uncover it. And so the archer remains. There are modern sightings, of course. In 1927, a Soviet excavation team near the Khenti Mountains claimed to find a sealed chamber filled with gold and inscriptions in old Mongolian script. Their radio logs ended with one word, some. Arrow. The expedition vanished, their maps burned. Only one photograph survived, showing an arrow embedded in steel. No bow could have loosed it. In 1999, a nomad child in Mongolia found a pouch of old bones wrapped in silk and tied with a strip of leather bearing a strange, sharp rune. When opened, the bones turned to dust. Inside the pouch was a note written in flawless modern Russian. Do not awaken the one who never sleeps. Perhaps it is all myth. Perhaps he was just a soldier, one of many lost in the dust of history, remembered only because of chance or fear. But the Mongol elders do not speak his name. They say his soul is wind-bound, and that when the stars flicker over the Gobi and wolves refuse to howl, it means the shadow rides once more, toward something, or away from something, protecting a grave dot or guarding a secret so old, even the steppe cannot remember. His quiver never empties, his eyes never close. And should you ever wander too far into Mongolia's ancient lands, listen. Not for footsteps, not for hoofbeats, but for the sound of a single arrow flying slow, low, and final, because some warriors do not vanish into legend. They become it. Let's begin Chapter 5. The Highland warrior who spoke to Arizin Slet. Us begin Chapter 5, where history folds into whisper, and the earth speaks not through books or monuments, but through birds that circle ruined towers, and black stones that hum under the moonlight. We return now to the Scottish Highlands, but this time further back, deeper into a place and time when clans still ruled the land, and warriors were as much myth as men. This is the tale of the Highland warrior who spoke to ravens, a man, with no clan tartan, no heir, no grave, only stories and the cold wind that calls his name. They called him Cale MacDonough, though some say that was never his real name. He emerged during the early stirrings of the Jacobite cause, before the battles were songs and before rebellion had a flag. He came from the moors or the sea or from the stones themselves, depending on who tells the story. What remains consistent is this: wherever he walked, ravens followed, not one, not two, but dozens. They say he was first seen during the burning of Glen Bray, where a small hamlet was erased by redcoats hunting suspected traitors. The sky was black with smoke, and yet amidst the ruin a boy saw him tall, cloaked, unmoving, standing beside a crumbled cottage with 3 ravens perched calmly on his shoulders. He didn't speak, he didn't move, but the boy said the birds cawed in unison, like a single breath split 3 ways. A week later, an entire British patrol vanished. On the road to Loch Arkaig, their wagons were found overturned, their supplies intact, but not a single drop of blood. Only black feathers scattered in the mud, and a circle of stones carved with ancient sigils, pulsing faintly with heat. The locals said it was Cale, that he had warned the land, and the land had listened. No clan claimed him. No one had seen him eat. Some swore he never touched the ground. But when rebellion began to whisper through the glens, he was there leading raids with untraceable steps, destroying outposts with no sound, his black-eyed companion always overhead, watching. The British called him the Crow Man. The clans called him An Filesake Duv, the Dark Seer. The Druids, long silent, spoke of him as one of the Bratherian Benigdan, the brothers of the Omen, ancient guardians of the Scottish land whose return would signal the final reckoning. What made him more than legend wasn't his stealth. It was his knowing. He knew where every soldier would be, what road they'd take, what weapons they carried. He knew when the rivers would rise and which trees would fall before the axe ever struck. They say the ravens whispered it to him, that they flew over mountains and watched, that their eyes saw what men could not, and when they returned they spoke not with words, but with pulses in the air that Cale understood as clearly as song. The oldest crones in fort, William say he was the last speaker of the Morrigan's tongue, the goddess of fate, war, and death, whose symbol was the raven. That Cale had been touched by her at birth, marked as a wanderer of borders, between life and death, between past and future. And so he wandered. When Culloden came, the battle that broke the rebellion, he was not seen. Some thought he'd fallen. Others believed he had vanished before the bloodshed, like a raven before a storm. But weeks later, when the moors were still soaked in red, a farmer's wife saw him standing at the edge of a peat bog, surrounded by hundreds of birds. They say he dropped a single stone into the bog, and the ravens lifted as one circling for hours, refusing to land. After that, Cale was not seen for years. But strange things began to happen across the Highlands. Weapons rusted overnight in armories. Bridges collapsed without wind. Maps drawn by the Crown changed themselves. Valleys were no longer where they had been. Roads no longer ended in villages. Entire routes vanished into marsh. And always, when these things occurred, someone somewhere reported a man in black with birds circling overhead. In 1791, an English captain reported a ghost encounter near the ruins of Castle Teorum. He claimed he heard whispering in Scots Gaelic, despite being alone, and saw a tall figure standing between 2 crumbling towers. When he tried to approach, The birds shrieked so loud his ears bled. His men found him crawling across the field. At dawn, clutching black feathers, his mouth sewn shut by his own doing. The report was sealed, but the journal he kept survived. Cale's presence began to shift from avenger to something more. Eternal Dot, he was seen less as a warrior, and more as a guardian of forgotten oaths. He protected graves no one remembered, stones without names, paths no longer walked, and to those who sought to erase the Highland memory, he was a curse made flesh. In 1820, a British officer attempted to build a road through Glen Moriston. Machinery failed, workers vanished, birds swarmed every dawn, and on the 5th day a raven landed on the engineer's desk with a small black pouch tied around its leg. Inside was a piece of ancient tartan, soaked in something dark, and a single word stitched in gold thread: Gabhale. Reclaiming. The project was abandoned. The glen was left alone. Dot and Cale. He still walks, Dot, sometimes in the periphery of a storm, sometimes as a tall figure, seen atop an ancient brock at sunset, but mostly he is in the birds. The ravens of the Highlands fly in strange formations. They avoid cities, but they hover over standing stones. They cry out at certain names. And once a year on the old Celtic feast of Samhain, they gather near the ruins of a long-lost chapel in the far north, silent, unmoving, as if awaiting something, or someone. Historians scoff. Ornithologists call it migration. But the locals say he calls them, that the warrior who spoke to ravens is not dead, that he sleeps beneath a hill that glows blue under lightning, a place you cannot find unless you are not looking. And when the land forgets itself again, when sacred places are paved, when ancient songs are mocked, when the Highland air grows still, he will rise, his sword will ring like thunder, and the sky will blacken, not with clouds, but with wings. For Cale MacDonough is not legend. He is memory. And memory, in the Highlands, never dies. It only waits. Let's begin Chapter 6. The Black Banner of Alamut. Let us begin Chapter 6. And for this we must descend, not into misty glens or crumbling forests, but into the raw, arid bones of the Persian mountains, where stone citadels once clawed toward. The sky and shadows had names sharper than swords. Here silence was not empty. It was filled with vows, whispers, and the breath of men who did not fear death, because they no longer belonged to the world that feared it. This is the story of the Black Banner of Alamut, of a nameless commander who led from the edge of myth, through ink and through blood, a ghost who was neither seen nor forgotten, and of the fortress where time itself unraveled. The assassins of Alamut were no ordinary warriors. Founded by Hassan I Saba during the 11th century, they were known as the Hishakin cloaked in mystery, feared across empires and more legend than army. Their stronghold, the fortress of Alamut, perched high in the Elburz mountains of Persia, was thought to be impenetrable, not because of its walls or weapons, but because of its secrets. No outsider who entered ever returned the same. It is said that within those halls time did not pass as it does elsewhere, that the mountain winds whispered names from the future, and that those who drank from the stone fountains of Alamut saw not visions, but choices. Among the many warriors who served the order, one figure stands apart. He had no name, none recorded, but he was known by what he wore, a veil of black, not cloth, but of layered silk mixed with ash. His eyes were the only thing visible burning, not with fire, but with stillness. He spoke to no one, not even the other Fida, the devoted followers. He bore no insignia, but wherever he went, the black banner was seen hung from parapets, etched into knives, carried by wind into enemy tents hours before they fell. He was the executioner of oaths, and he never failed. Mongol Empire, rising like a storm from the east, devoured city after city in its path. In 1256, Hulagu Khan set his gaze upon Alamut, believing its destruction would mark the end of the assassins forever. But that is not what happened. As the siege began, strange things unfolded. Messengers never arrived. Bridges collapsed days before. The Mongols reached them. Watchtowers fell not from battle, but from within, as if their stones remembered Dot, and then reports came. In the dead of night, a veiled figure walked through the Mongol camps. No gate was breached. No sentry alarmed. Men were found dead in their sleep, faces frozen not in fear, but peace. The Mongols called him the Black Breath, but he was more than a killer. He was a message. In one chilling account, a Mongol general awoke to find a note beside his bed folded, unsigned, written in a language no one could decipher. Alongside it lay a single black feather and a bowl of warm goat's milk, untouched. He never spoke again. Still, the siege continued. And on a day when the sky was gray, not with storm but smoke, the fortress of Alamut fell, or so it seemed. Tower burned, the gates collapsed, the mountain was conquered, but not the banner. As dawn rose, Mongol soldiers witnessed something impossible. Atop the ruined tower, where no man could have stood, the black banner waved, not tattered, not scorched, but whole, and beneath it a figure stood veiled, silent, watching. He raised no weapon. He made no gesture. He simply remained, and then he was gone. The Mongols searched the entire mountain. No body, no blood, no trail. But wherever they walked, they found symbols etched into stone. A black circle, pierced by a single downward line. Even centuries later, travelers to the Elborz Mountains speak of the banner. In 1932, a French climber reported seeing fabric flapping on a cliff face during a storm. When he reached it, there was no cloth, only a carved recess in the stone, and a black sigil freshly painted. In 1974, a Soviet geologist claimed his instruments malfunctioned near Mount Damavand. The sky darkened for precisely 7 minutes. He heard what he called chants from underground and smelled burnt ink. He left the field and never returned. Historians treat the black banner as symbolism, a poetic image of the fall of a secret order. But some claim the banner has moved, that it now appears across centuries. Wherever empires grow arrogant, a black veil hung in a Syrian temple before a crusade. A tower in India marked by shadow during the British Raj. An abandoned monastery in Spain where locals say the wind tastes like ash. Wherever it appears, what follows is silence, disappearance, an enemy that cannot be named, only felt. The banner's presence is never announced. It is recognized. It does not fly for a cause. It flies as a warning that some truths were never meant to be uncovered, that some warriors do not serve nations, they serve memory. They serve vows. They serve the black thread that binds history's hidden chapters. And if you ever see a tower with no shadow at noon, or a piece of cloth that does not flutter in wind, or hear ink drip where there is no paper, then you may be near the black banner, and he may be watching, still veiled, still silent, still faithful dot to an order that never truly fell dot to a LAMU2 dot to the oath that cannot be broken, because it was never spoken aloud, and it never ends, not with death, not with death, not with fire dot only, with forgetting dot, and the black banner does not forget dot ever. Let's begin Chapter 7, The Knight Who Sank with the Sekechors. Now we move eastward, into lands steeped in fog and forest, where bells toll in forgotten ruins, and shepherds walk past broken chapels without looking back. This is not the story of a holy man, nor merely of a knight. It is the story of a man caught between devotion and darkness, between faith and something much older than faith, buried beneath the stones of Eastern Europe. This is the story of the knight who sank with the church, and whose armor has never rusted, because it was never found dot in the late 14th century. As kingdoms rose and fell like wheat in the wind, a small hilltop village, known as Velirad, watched the approach of war. The Hussite wars were beginning, and fires had already touched the horizon. The villagers, caught between empires and ideologies, built their hopes around one thing, the Church of St. Velen, perched atop the village hill. The church was not grand, but it was defiant. Its bell, cast from local ore and etched with unknown sigils, was said to ring louder during storms, and to silence itself in the presence of lies. No one could recall who built it, or who designed its mosaic floor, an array of shapes and runes that no bishop could interpret. And standing guard over it always was a knight. His name was Sir Alaric of Moravia. He did not arrive by decree. He simply appeared one spring morning, armored in blackened steel that shimmered like river water, a crimson cross painted not with paint but dried rose petals. He spoke little. He ate alone. He prayed in the chapel each midnight, face bowed. To the altar, lips unmoving. No one remembered him being knighted. No one recalled seeing his face, but none dared question him. For every time raiders approached, they were turned away not with swords, but with fear. Some spoke of dreams warning them not to ascend the hill. Others said they saw the chapel vanish into cloud before they could approach. The people of Velirad felt safe, but safe is a dangerous feeling in a world ruled by forgotten things. In 1421, as the Hussite movement grew and armies swept through the lands, word came that the Black Regiment, a mercenary company known for razing churches and draining monks of blood for sacred proof, was heading toward Velirad. The villagers begged Sir Alaric to flee. They said the hill could not hold. He simply nodded. Then the hill shall fall, he said dot, and he walked into the church dot. The villagers watched as he entered the sanctuary, closed the wooden doors, and rang the bell only once. A sound that echoed far too long, shaking leaves loose from trees that were not yet dying. Then silence. No light from the windows. No sound from within. The regiment arrived 2 days later, but when they reached the village, there was no hill. Not that it was empty. It was gone. Vanished. The land where the hill had stood was now a smooth plain, unmarked, unbroken save for a single red petal pressed into the earth. One soldier tried to pick it up. His hand blistered, and he screamed until dawn. The villagers fled. Most never spoke of Velirad again, but some returned and found something strange. Each spring, on the same day Sir Alaric disappeared, the wind changes direction. Birds fly in silent circles above the plain, and for a brief moment a bell can be heard beneath the soil. In 1893, a team of Czech geologists used ground-penetrating equipment to survey the land. At precisely 37 feet beneath the surface, they detected not rock, but hollow space-arched ceilings, stairways, and a structure shaped exactly like the church that once stood. But when they attempted to dig, the soil hardened, machines failed, and one worker disappeared right in front of his team. No sound, no collapse, just accents. They abandoned the project. In 2001, a local hiker claimed he had seen light beneath his feet while walking the plain. Not sunlight, something cooler, bluer, like moonlight reflected in water. He reported hearing a whisper not in Czech, but in Latin, Cratra, non vidir, believe. Do not see. To this day, the hill is known as Rob Surt's, the grave of the heart. No map labels it. No roads lead to it, but every century a red flower blooms on its surface. Only one, always in the same spot. No one dares pluck it. The legend of Sir Alaric has spread in secret circles. Some say he was not a man at all, but an avatar of something older. A sentinel bound not by crown or country, but by a vow made in the age when stones still sang. Others say the church was not a house of worship, but a seal, and when Alaric rang the bell, he did not warn the invaders, he warned what slept below. Some nights when the moon is high and the wind still, travelers say they see a church rising faintly from the mist of Phantom Chapel, glowing faintly, doors ajar. Inside, a knight kneels at the altar. He does not move. He does not breathe. But if you enter, and if your heart carries violence or doubt, the doors will close behind you, and you will not leave, not because you are trapped, but because you have been chosen. To guard what must not wake. To pray where angels know. Longer listen. To kneel where only silence remains sacred. And in doing so, you join him, a knight, beneath the hill. Waiting. Not for rescue, but for the sound of the bell, the sound that ends all forgetting and begins the remembering that once, long ago, a man gave everything not to fight, but to hold the line between belief and the abyss, and for that he was never buried. He was preserved inside the church that still stands, not above the ground, but beneath it. Listening. And still watching, forevermore. Let's begin Chapter 8. The legion that marched into the Sandy. Now we stand at the edge of the known world, where history fades into silence and memory surrenders to myth. In the desolate north of Britannia, where Roman banners once cut through mist and rebellion, a legion vanished, not in battle, not in glory, but in an erasure so complete that not even Rome dared speak their name aloud again. This is the story of the 9th Legion, the lost, the forgotten, the ones who marched into the northern wilderness and never returned. Legio Ix Hispana. They were not common soldiers. They were Rome's steel-spined veterans of Gaul, victors of Germania, the hammer that crushed insurrections in Africa and Judea, feared by enemies, revered by allies, and trusted by emperors. But in 117 A.D. they marched north into the lands of the Picts to do what Rome had always done, conquer, absorb, erase, and then silenced at no scroll, no messenger, no whisper of their fate. A full legion, over 5,000 men, officers, standard bearers, medics, engineers gone. Not a corpse, not a sword, just empty land and unanswered prayers. Some said the northern tribes ambushed them. Others claimed betrayal from within. But among the Picts, the tale is darker. It is said the Romans woke something in those high moors, something not meant to be seen. They call it the veil, a mist that falls only once every generation. Thick, cold, unmoving, and alive. Elders warn that when the veil descends, sound fades, direction dies, and memory unravels. Those who walk into it are not killed. They are rewritten. In 1793, British soldiers exploring ancient forts in Northumberland discovered strange stone markers etched not in Latin, but in looping, spiraling patterns never seen in Roman architecture. One stone, cracked down the middle, bore a chilling phrase in faint Latin: Oblivio venit sicut nubis. Oblivion comes like a cloud. In 1921, a farmer unearthed a Roman gladius near Hadrian's Wall. The blade was perfectly preserved, untouched by rust, but heavier than expected. When experts examined it, they found carvings on the inside of the hilt, only visible with heat. Small figures walking in a circle, eyes closed, mouths open as if screaming. They could not replicate the effect. The gladius was moved to a museum. That museum burned down 3 months later, but no trace of the sword was found in the ashes. But it isn't just artifacts that remain. In 2007, a hiker lost in the Highlands reported seeing a formation of men in dark tunics walking in perfect silence. Their shields bore no emblems. Their eyes were white. When he called out, they did not stop. They walked until the fog consumed them. He was found days later, dehydrated but unharmed. In his pocket. A Roman coin, minted during Emperor Trajan's reign, pristine and gleaming as if fresh from the forge. He had never seen it before. The 9th Legion's last known station was Ebercombe, modern-day York. Records from 108 A.D. confirm their presence. Then nothing. All official Roman documents stopped mentioning the 9th. No reassignment, no disbandment. Not even a rumor. How does an empire forget its sharpest blade? Unless it didn't. Unless it chose to forget. Some believe the 9th found something in the north that Rome could not allow to exist, not barbarians, but a truth. A gate. A veil between this world and one beneath it. Ancient Celtic inscriptions speak of a battlefield between flesh and fog, where warriors fall not to wounds, but to memory. The site is known as Caer Dreg, the fortress of ghosts. No such fortress exists on modern maps. Yet satellite images from 2016 revealed strange circular indentations in the terrain patterns matching old Roman marching camps. But the grass around them is scorched, always, even in rain. Geologists say the soil is different, burnt at a molecular level. But by what? In Roman mythology, Lethe was the river of forgetting. What if it wasn't a metaphor? What if the 9th Legion crossed a Lethe, of earth and air, some place where identity dissolves, a hidden tomb for memory itself? And perhaps that is why they were never spoken of again. To protect the world from what they became. There are whispers among historians brave enough to listen that Roman scouts had mapped a northern cavern filled with carvings not made by human hands, serpent shapes, human faces without mouths, and tall figures with outstretched hands, palms upward, as if offering silence. The ninth was sent not to fight, but to bury Dot, to seal Dot, to forget. But they failed, or perhaps they succeeded Dot at a cost, the cost of becoming part of the seal itself. Legends say the ninth now walk the mists, not as men, but as echoes. They carry no banners. They bear no rank, but they remember, just enough to patrol, just enough to keep the veil from lifting Dot. And every century, when Rome is forgotten a little more, the fog grows stronger. One day, the veil will rise again, Dot, and when it does, they will march Dot not to invade, but to remind that memory has a price, and some stories are buried not for safety, but for mercy, the end of the legendary warriors who vanished from the battlefield. If our storytelling brought you peace tonight, if these echoes of history helped your mind drift softly into dreams, please consider subscribing to Relic of Stories. Your support lets us keep unearthing the forgotten, the mysterious, the unseen. Share these tales, leave a comment, or just return whenever you need a quiet voice in the dark. Until next time, sleep well and remember, not all who vanish are truly gone.